Hi everyone. I'm very happy to present you a seminar, an interesting seminar on the recent topic regarding large language models on a downstream task, which is machine translation. So in this particular seminar, I'm going to present you machine translation for the extremely low resource languages with the focus on approaches, opportunities, and limitations of large language models. So specifically, toward this effective machine translation for extremely low resource languages, approaches, opportunities, and limitations of the large language models. So one may think that LLMs can effectively perform any task, but that is not true. That's not true, because it fails on extremely low resource languages, or for low resource languages, LLMs fail to effectively perform some downstream language tasks. So in this particular seminar, we'll be focusing on one downstream task, that is machine translation. So we can find different downstream tasks, the language processing tasks, such as the part of speech tagging, name identity recognitions, and the others. So for this session, our focus will be on the effectiveness of LLMs on this particular task. So currently we do have different LLMs. We are utilizing different LLMs for our different tasks, for different scenarios. So the outline of this seminar, or in short, in this session we will try to touch why extremely low resource machine translation still matters, and what are the extremely low resource languages, and the evolution of machine translation approaches, the key challenges in the extremely low resource machine translation task, and the approaches before and beyond the LLMs, the opportunities of LLMs for extremely low resource machine translation, and why LLMs are not a complete solution for the machine translation task, and the case for the hybrid machine translation in the extremely low resource settings, what current research still fails to address in the context of machine translation, and the future direction for the effective extremely low resource machine translation, and finally the conclusion. So why extremely low resource machine translation still matters. So even though LLMs are powerful, their success is uneven across languages, especially those with almost digital data. For example, for some low resource languages like African underrepresented languages, and indigenous and minority languages with limited corpora, the LLMs are less effective. So why this machine translation still matters for such extremely low resources? low resource languages. So there are thousands of languages remain digitally underrepresented. So so far, the representation of digital representation of natural languages is too long. That is, very few very few languages are uh, resource rich, but majority of languages, especially the African continental languages, are underrepresented. And many languages have no large parallel corpora, which is helpful for performing the machine translation research, for developing the machine translation models, and no mature NLP tools. So inconsistent orthography of the languages, the little web resources present. So why we need machine translation? Why we need machine translation? Obviously, the machine translation is helpful in different domains of our life: in education, in health communication, in government information access, in digital, for the sake of digital inclusion, and for cultural preservation. So if one is a community language is digitally included, that is, uh, um, it will be very helpful to just address different problems of the society. So it's culture, because one aspect of culture is the language itself. So the language of a given society is reflecting the culture of the community. So for the sake of cultural preservation, this machine translation is very important. In government service provision, so the citizens or people may request different services and as per their needs. So mostly the local community is using their own mother tongue language to get access to the government services. So if their languages, if their languages, the machine, the mother tongue language, are just supported by technology like machine translation, obviously governments will be providing its service in a very happyful and very interesting way. So the service delivery will be good and will be optimized obviously. So the health communication, so patient is and the service providers communication can be facilitated with the help of machine translation, and the same is true in the case of education. So in different spheres of our life we can just consider machine translation as a very helpful tool. So that's why we need to deal with this downstream task in the era of LLMs. So what are the extremely low resource languages? So for just saying one particular language is an extremely low resource language, what we should consider. So high resource language like the English language, the Chinese, the French, so those languages are high resource languages compared to other languages, because for those languages we can find a very large amount of data throughout the globe from the web, which is just written in those languages. So we can have a very large amount of data compared to the other languages. So the existence of large amount of data set which is prepared or which is written in those languages is indicating that those languages are high resource languages, and low resource languages are the ones with limited corpora and tools, and the extremely low resource languages are the ones with almost no parallel corpora and minimal monolingual text, few linguistic tools, weak benchmark availability. So extremely low resource machine translation settings as languages with very small or no parallel corpora. So the machine translation, when you say machine translation of extremely low resource language, or machine translation that is developed for extremely low resource setting, it is the one which is dealing with languages having very small or parallel corpora, or languages with limited monolingual data, limited representation in LLM pre-training, because LLMs are pre-trained with a very large amount of data set with diverse languages. So most LLMs are missing or just considering just set of languages. So many languages, especially the low resource languages and the extremely low resource languages, are mostly missed from the set of data that is used for training the LLMs, for pre-training. So languages with few or no tokenizers, like part of speech taggers, morphological analyzers, lexicons, or the evaluation data sets. So language with those features can be considered extremely low resource language, and in turn machine translation that is developed or dealing with such languages we call the extremely low resource machine translation setting. So resource scarcity, when we say resource scarcity, is not just about dataset size. It also includes the script and the orthography issues, the lack of standardization. So the standard used for one particular language also determines or reflects the resource scarcity, the domain mismatch. So the language resource, which is of a very few domains, or focusing on one particular domain, obviously will be considered as a small data set because of its diversity, missing domain diversity. So weak digital ecosystem is also another reflection of resource scarcity. So far, how the machine translation approaches are evolving. So previously, the approach was a simple rule-based machine translation. Rule-based machine translation, having the grammar, rules, and lexicons. Then, after rule-based machine translation, then statistical machine translation, which is focusing on the phrase-based alignments. So after the rule based, then the approach is shifted to the statistical machine translation. And the statistical machine translation, after statistical machine translation, then neural machine translation, such as the sequence to sequence models, and the sequence to sequence models with attention mechanism. So by incorporating the attention mechanism, the translation accuracy is improved in neural machine translation, which is highly dependent on data. So they are data hungry. But if we have a large amount of data set, we can develop neural machine translation models. And after the neural machine translation models, multilingual machine translation, such as involving the transfer learning, the parameter sharing tasks. So then currently or nowadays we have just LLMs as one way of performing machine translation. So by providing the appropriate prompts to the LLMs, we can let them translate the source language into the target language, but here what we should think of about these LLMs is that they, in the context of machine translation, we should consider LLMs as one way of or one approach of translating the source language into the target language. So the newest point in the progression of machine translation, this LLM is one approach. So in the history of the machine translation, or the evolution of the machine translation approaches, LLM can be considered as the newest approach. So for extremely low resource languages, like the older approaches remain relevant because they can inject linguistic constraints, dictionaries, and morphology aware processing. So what are the key challenges in the extremely low resource machine translation task? What are the key challenges that we may face whenever we are dealing with the machine translation task for extremely low resource languages? One is an obvious challenge is data scarcity. Data scarcity is one challenge, and because we cannot easily get the parallel corpora and the limited monolingual text, and we cannot have clean benchmarks that can be used in the development of machine translation models. And the other is the linguistic complexity of the language. So for the languages having the rich morphology, it is bit challenging. Developing the machine translation models is bit challenging. Then free order the free order aspect of those extremely low resource languages is also another linguistic complexity aspect that is challenging the development of machine translation models. The dialects variation, then agglutination, or the inflection complexity and code switching are the challenges. The other challenge is the infrastructure scarcity. So the tools that we may need in the development of machine translation for extremely low resource languages. So the absence of tokenizers, the morphological analyzers, the spell normalization tools, the dictionaries or lexicons, the standard orthography, those are the challenges. So the absence of those tools or the infrastructures are just creating challenge in the development of machine translation for the extremely low resource languages. The representation gap is also another challenge in pre-trained models. So another challenge is the evaluation difficulty. So we need to have a standard metrics. We need to have a standard metrics that we should use for measuring the performance of machine translation models. So value is the one metric for measuring the performance of the machine translation model, but this alone may be misleading. So we need to have another parameter. So the absence of human evaluation benchmarks, and so is also another challenge. So we need to have prior to the development of machine translation models for such languages, we need to have benchmarks, human prepared benchmarks, and the absence of domain specific test sets is also creating another challenge. Okay, so what central research question that we can raise here in the context of machine translation in the era of LLMs? So we can say, to what extent can large language models enable machine translation for extremely low resource languages, and what complementary approaches remain necessary when training data and language technologies are minimal or absent? This is our central research question that we should raise. So specifically we can just arise those sub questions like, what machine translation approaches are available for extremely low resource settings or for extremely low resource languages? How can LLMs be used? So there are different approaches or techniques, or the prompting techniques or inferencing techniques, LLM inferencing techniques that we can use when we are interacting with LLMs. So for the machine translation task, when we are utilizing LLMs, how we can just interact LLMs for machine translation task? So that they shoot, that few shoot, fine tuning, retrieval, or synthetic data generation. How we can use LLMs? What limitations remain in coverage, faithfulness, and linguistic adequacy? And do classical NLP tools still matter in the LLM era? So those are some specific questions that we can raise. So approaches before and beyond LLMs. So the classical or the pre-LLM approaches for the machine translation. So as we have already said, that the rule-based machine translation was the pre-LLM approach. Dictionary or lexicon-driven translation, the phrase-based statistical machine translation, they transfer learning from related languages. So if there are some related languages, we may transfer the knowledge from those related languages. So for the new language that for which we are developing the machine translation models, if there are any, there are some related languages, so we may just transfer knowledge from those languages. Before translation, before one language in the translation process is also another approach. Morphology aware systems, back translation with small corpora. Those are the some approaches which are employed before LLMs. Then after those approaches, the neural approach, the neural network approach. So neural low resource machine translation approaches were developed. So the multilingual neural machine translation, the transfer learning from high resource pairs, the parameter sharing, the support segmentation when we are tokenizing the sequences, we may consider support. So rather than considering the whole word, we may just segment a single word into subwords for the sake of improving the performance of the model. And supervised or semi-supervised machine translation and multilingual pre-training is also another approach that we can just consider in the second approach. And the third approach is the LLM based approach. So we may use zero-shot prompting. So in general, when we are inferencing the LLMs, we can just use the we can use zero-shot prompting. We can just use a few shot prompting. That is, zero-shot is just asking the LLMs to translate the source language into target language without providing any example. If we provided a few examples and accordingly we are asking the LLM to translate the source language into target language, that is what we call few shot prompting. And we may also provide some instructions when we are querying the LLMs to translate the source language into the target language. The chain of translation, constrained prompting, fine-tuning, or continued pre-training, retrieval augmented machine translation, so retrieval augmented generation. We can also use synthetic data generation using LLMs. We can also use LLMs for generating synthetic data. Hybrid pipelines with classical tools. We can also just integrate. We can use the integration of LLMs with classical tools for improving the performance of the translation models. So what are the opportunities that we can get from LLMs? So the existence of LLMs is having some opportunities for the machine translation task. So, in zero shoot or few shoot translation, we can produce translations without large task specific corpora. So, without having just a large data set, we can utilize LLMs to translate texts from source to target language. Cross-lingual transfer we can use. Synthetic data generation we can use LLMs for synthetic data generation. We can also use as a linguistic assistance LLMs. We can utilize LLMs as a linguistic assistance, useful for normalization, like normalization for glossary induction and annotation, and for error analysis. And human in the loop machine translation, so we can utilize LLMs to support translators through post-editing, terminology suggestions, and iterative refinement. So why LLMs are not a complete solution for the machine translation task? One limitation is poor language coverage. So they are poor in covering large set of languages. So in the pre-training of LLMs, there are some set of languages considered in the data set of LLMs. So why it matters for extremely low resource machine translation? So the target language may be absent or nearly absent in a pre-training of the LLMs. So in the pre-training dataset of the LLMs, if the target language is absent or nearly absent, what will happen with the LLMs is LLMs may hallucinate, language switching, and nonsense outputs. Another is tokenization or script issues. So for rare words are frequented. Scripts may be poorly handled, and this results in loss of morphology and lexical fidelity. Faithfulness risk. So fluent output can still be semantically wrong. So some outputs may seem fluent, but semantically wrong outputs. So they may result in misleading translations. So a wrong translation. Domain fragility. Performance can collapse on legal, religious, or health text. So this results in unsafe or unusable output. Evaluation instability is another limitation, and why this matters. Prompt wording and model version can change results, and this consequence is weak reproducibility and comparability. So we can not compare different outputs if there is no reproducibility. The case of hybrid machine translation in extremely low resource settings. So for extremely low resource languages, the classical NLP tools may still be essential even in the LLM era. Why? Because they can produce provide morphological segmentation, lexicons and bilingual dictionaries, transliteration. For the transliteration we can use, for the orthographic normalization, for grammar constraints, terminology control we can use. For different purposes we can use those classical NLP tools. So what approach that we can recommend in the LLM era for extremely low resource language machine translation is the hybrid machine translation, which is LLM plus the classical NLP tools plus the human linguistics knowledge plus the small curated corpora. So the integration of, or the hybridization of those features or those tools is helpful and very important for developing machine translation model that may have an improved performance for the extremely low resource settings. So what current research still fails to address? So in the context of low resource machine translation in the era of LLMs, so far most LLM machine translation research focuses on low resource languages, not extremely low resource settings. And many benchmark languages still have more data than truly marginalized languages and underrepresented African and Ethiopian languages. So if we are developing languages machine translation model for Ethiopian languages, for Ethiopian low resource and extremely low resource languages, Ethiopian languages, they are mostly underrepresented. And the same is true for other African countries. So they are often missing from the systematic evaluation. There is a limited research on the hybrid LLM plus the rule-based machine translation. So morphology aware prompting, pre-processing, the community-centered evaluation, the domain-specific machine translation for languages with scarce corpora. So fluency is often overemphasized, while faithfulness and cultural adequacy are under-examined. So what are the future directions for effective extremely low resource machine translation? The hybrid LLM plus classical NLP systems, for especially for the morphologically rich languages. A related language transfer learning. So we can use linguistic proximity among languages where appropriate. Community-driven corpus creation is very important, very important. So especially for those extremely low resource languages. Before developing the machine translation, community-driven corpus creation is very important. So the corpus should be developed by considering different domains like religious context, religious context. So religious texts should be considered, the educational materials, the oral transcriptions, transcription projects, and government communication texts. So those things should be considered for developing the corpora with diverse domains. So the future directions for effective extremely low resource machine translation, another one is the small domain adapted machine translation system. So we should just also think of small models, not only the large language models, the giant large language models, but the smaller efficient models can also be adopted. So if they are having the good performance, we can also think of those models, development of those small models. Better evaluation frameworks, we should think of those evaluation frameworks. And the language preservation and responsible NLP should also be considered. So in conclusion here, extremely low resource machine translation remains a major challenge despite the progress in multilingual NLP. So LLMs provide promising opportunities through the zero shoot transfer, synthetic data generation, and multilingual generation. However, LLMs are constrained by poor language coverage, tokenization problems, hallucination, and evaluation challenges. So, therefore, effective machine translation for extremely low resource languages will likely require hybrid, linguistically informed, and community-centered approaches rather than reliance on LLMs alone. So this hybrid approach is very important. So what are the some research titles that we can just formulate to address those future directions, or to touch those future directions? For example, we can state or formulate a research title like this: hybrid machine translation for extremely low resource languages, integrating large language models, classical NLP, and linguistically informed resource construction. The second one, another alternative towards effective machine translation for underrepresented extremely low resource languages, large language models adaptation, related language transfer, and hybrid translation strategies. Thirdly, we can also provide another alternative: advancing machine translation for extremely low resource languages in the era of large language models, hybrid architectures, community-centered resource development, and robust evaluation frameworks. So those are the some research titles that we can formulate. Thank you very much for your attention. Just forward your reflection, your comments, your ideas, your questions. So you are welcome. Thank you.